The sun was setting over New Haven Colony, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Sophie Morgan laughed as she chased her friend Danny through the colonial gardens, their feet kicking up small clouds of red dust from the path. The gardens were Sophie's favorite place on the entire planet, filled with earth plants that somehow managed to grow in the alien soil. Her mother always said it was a miracle that anything grew here at all, but Sophie just thought it was beautiful. Karen Morgan watched her daughter play from a bench near the fountain, a smile on her face. Life on New Haven wasn't easy, but moments like these made it worthwhile. The colony had been established only 5 years ago, and every day brought new challenges. But the people here were good, hard-working folks who looked out for each other. Karen felt safe here, safer than she had felt in years. She had no way of knowing that in less than 10 minutes her entire world would shatter. The ships appeared without warning. One moment the sky was clear, and the next, 3 massive vessels were descending through the atmosphere. They were unlike any human ships Karen had ever seen, all sharp angles and dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The colonial alarm system began to wail, a sound that made Karen's blood run cold. She jumped to her feet and screamed for Sophie. Sophie heard her mother's voice and turned, confusion on her young face. She saw the ships and felt a spike of fear in her chest. Danny grabbed her hand and they started running toward the adults. But the ships moved faster than seemed possible. Hatches opened in their bellies and figures began dropping down on cables. They weren't human. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and too many joints in their limbs. Their faces were hidden behind smooth black helmets that reflected the dying sunlight. Karen ran toward Sophie, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She could see other colonists scattering, some running for their homes, others trying to reach their children. The colonial security team was mobilizing, but they were too few and too far away. The aliens moved through the gardens with terrifying efficiency. Their movements coordinated like a pack of hunting animals. They carried weapons that crackled with blue energy, and when they fired them, people simply dropped to the ground unconscious. Sophie was 20 feet from her mother when one of the aliens stepped between them. Karen didn't hesitate. She threw herself at the creature, screaming, clawing at its armor with her bare hands. The alien seemed almost surprised by her ferocity. It tried to push her away, but Karen held on with desperate strength. She could see Sophie over the alien's shoulder, her daughter's face twisted with fear. Then another alien appeared behind Karen, and she felt a sharp pain between her shoulder blades. The world tilted sideways, and darkness swallowed her whole. Sophie screamed as her mother fell. She tried to run to her, but strong hands grabbed her from behind. She kicked and bit and scratched, just like her father had taught her. But the alien holding her was too strong. It lifted her off the ground as if she weighed nothing at all. Sophie could see Danny being grabbed by another alien, and all around the gardens, children were being taken. The adults who tried to fight were stunned and left lying on the ground. Those who ran were chased down with ease. The alien carrying Sophie moved quickly toward one of the ships. She could see the interior now, all cold metal and harsh lighting. There were cages inside, dozens of them, and other colonists were already being pushed into them. Sophie struggled harder, but it was useless. The alien's grip was like iron. It threw her into a cage with 5 other children, all of them crying or screaming or both. The door slammed shut with a sound of finality that made Sophie's stomach twist. The raid lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish. The aliens moved through New Haven like a well-oiled machine, taking what they wanted and leaving destruction in their wake. They focused primarily on children and young adults, ignoring the elderly and those who couldn't work. When their ships finally lifted off, they left behind a colony in chaos. Stunned colonists lay scattered across the gardens, and those who had managed to hide emerged to find their loved ones missing. Karen woke up an hour later, her body aching and her mind foggy. The first thing she saw was the empty sky where the alien ships had been. The second thing she saw was the spot where Sophie had been standing. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and she began to scream her daughter's name. Other parents were doing the same, their voices creating a chorus of grief that echoed across the colony. The colonial security chief, a woman named Linda Hayes, tried to organize a response. She sent out distress calls to nearby systems and contacted the Galactic Council. But everyone knew that help would take days to arrive, and by then the aliens would be long gone. The security footage showed ships belonging to the Zetharans, a species known throughout the galaxy for their involvement in the slave trade. They operated in the shadows, moving their captives through a network of illegal markets that stretched across dozens of star systems. Karen sat in the security office, her hands shaking as she tried to compose a message. She needed to contact Jack. He was 3 sectors away working on some contract she didn't fully understand. Jack had always been careful about the details of his work, not because he didn't trust her, but because he wanted to keep his family separate from that part of his life. But none of that mattered now. Their daughter was gone, taken by aliens who saw her as nothing more than merchandise. The message Karen recorded was short and simple. She explained what had happened, her voice breaking as she described watching Sophie being taken. She told Jack that the Galactic Council had been contacted, but that their response would be slow. She told him that she needed him home. What she didn't say, but what Jack would understand immediately, was that she needed him to do what he did best. She needed him to be the man the galaxy feared, the man who could walk into impossible situations and somehow walk back out alive. As Karen sent the message, she thought about the stories Jack had told her about his past, stories about battles fought in the darkness of space, about enemies who had underestimated humanity's capacity for violence when protecting their own. She had always been grateful that Jack had left that life behind when Sophie was born, but now, for the first time, she found herself hoping that the old Jack Morgan was still there, waiting beneath the surface. Because if anyone could bring their daughter home, it was him. Jack Morgan was sitting across from a shipping magnate named Gregory Cole when his communication device buzzed. He normally would have ignored it during a business meeting, but something made him glance down at the screen. The message was from Karen, marked urgent. Jack's expression didn't change, but his eyes shifted in a way that made Gregory pause mid-sentence. Jack held up one hand and accessed the message. He turned slightly away from the table, giving himself a moment of privacy in the crowded conference room. The recording was only 2 minutes long, but by the end of it, Jack's entire posture had changed. His shoulders were tight, his jaw was set, and his eyes had gone very cold. Gregory had been in business for 30 years and had learned to read people. The man sitting across from him now was not the same person who had walked into the meeting an hour ago. Jack stood up without a word. He gathered his datapad and walked toward the door. Gregory called after him, reminding him that they hadn't finished negotiating the contract. Jack stopped at the doorway and looked back. His voice was calm when he spoke, but there was something underneath it that made Gregory's mouth go dry. The contract is void. I'm going dark. If anyone asks about me, tell them I had a family emergency. Jack left the station within the hour. His ship, the Reckoning, was docked in Bay 7. It was a medium-sized vessel, nothing fancy to look at from the outside. But Jack had spent years modifying it, installing military-grade systems that most civilian ships couldn't even dream of having. The ship's computer recognized him as he approached and powered up automatically. Jack went straight to the cockpit and began plotting a course to New Haven. As the Reckoning left the station, Jack pulled up everything he could find about the raid. The Colonial security team had uploaded their footage to the Galactic Network, hoping someone might recognize the attackers. Jack watched the footage 3 times, his expression never changing. He recognized the ships immediately. Zitharans. They were one of the species that humanity had clashed with during the early years of galactic expansion. The war had ended in a stalemate, but relations had never been friendly. Jack knew about the Zitharan slave trade. Everyone did. It was one of the galaxy's dirty secrets, something that the Galactic Council pretended to fight while doing very little about it. The Zitharans operated in regions of space where council authority was weak, moving their captives through a network of black markets and criminal enterprises. They were careful, professional, and very, very good at what they did. But they had made one critical mistake. They had taken Sophie Morgan. And Sophie's father was not the kind of man who would wait for the Galactic Council to mount a rescue operation. The journey to New Haven took 4 days. Jack spent the time making contacts and calling in favors. He had served in the human military for 15 years before going private, and he had made friends and enemies in equal measure. The friends remembered what Jack had done for them. The enemies remembered why they were afraid of him. By the time the Reckoning entered New Haven's orbit, Jack had a list of names, locations, and possible leads. Karen was waiting at the landing pad when Jack's ship touched down. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and her face pale. When Jack came down the ramp, she ran to him and threw her arms around him. Jack held her, and for a moment his carefully controlled expression cracked. He pressed his face against her hair and whispered something that only she could hear. They went to the Colonial Security Office together. Linda Hayes was there, along with a representative from the Galactic Council. The representative was a Thurian, a species known for their bureaucratic nature and their love of procedure. His name was Coordinator Venn, and he spoke in the slow, measured tones of someone who had given the same speech many times before. "We understand your distress," Venn said, his translator rendering his words into perfect English. "The Council is treating this matter with the utmost seriousness. We have dispatched investigators to analyze the scene, and we are in the process of filing formal charges against the Zitharan government." Jack listened without interrupting. When Venn finished, Jack asked a single question. "How long?" Venn blinked his large eyes. "I'm sorry? How long until the Council mounts a rescue operation?" Venn made a gesture that might have been the Thurian equivalent of a shrug. "These matters take time, Mr. Morgan. We must gather evidence, coordinate with multiple governments, establish jurisdiction. The process could take several months." "Several months," Jack repeated. His voice was flat, emotionless. "My daughter has been in the hands of slavers for 4 days, and you're telling me it might be months before anyone does anything." Venn seemed to sense the danger in Jack's tone. "I understand your frustration, but these procedures exist for a reason. We cannot simply invade Zitharan space without proper authorization. That would be an act of war." Jack stood up. "Thank you for your time, Coordinator." Venn looked relieved that the meeting was ending. Linda Hayes, who had been silent up to this point, stood as well. She followed Jack and Karen out of the office. Once they were alone in the corridor, she spoke quietly. "I did some digging on my own, off the record." Linda glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "The Zitharans who run the slave trade operate out of a place called the Vortex Nebula. It's an unclaimed space, technically outside any government's jurisdiction. They have a processing center there where they sort the captives before sending them to buyers." Jack turned to face her fully. "You have coordinates?" Linda hesitated. "I have a general location. But Jack, that place is a fortress. They have automated defenses, patrol ships, hundreds of guards. You can't just fly in there alone." "Watch me," Jack said. Karen grabbed his arm. "Jack, please. I know what you're thinking, but you can't do this alone. If something happens to you, then Sophie has no one." Jack looked at his wife, and his expression softened slightly. "Karen, you know what I used to do. You know what I'm capable of. The Council isn't going to help us, not in time. Those aliens took our daughter. They took her because they think humans are weak, that we'll just file a complaint and wait for justice." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was hard as steel. "I'm going to show them exactly how wrong they are." Linda spoke up again. "I might have someone who can help. An old contact of mine. Used to run intelligence operations in that sector. He might know more about the processing center's defenses." Jack nodded. "Set up a meeting. I need everything you can get me. Blueprints, security protocols, patrol patterns, anything." Over the next 2 days, Jack met with Linda's contact and half a dozen other people who had information about the Zitharan operation. He paid for some information, traded favors for other pieces, and extracted a few details through less pleasant means. The picture that emerged was not encouraging. The Vortex Nebula was a nightmare to navigate, filled with electromagnetic storms and asteroid fields. The processing center itself was built into a large asteroid, protected by shield generators and automated weapons platforms. But Jack also learned something interesting. The facility had a weakness. Once per day during a maintenance cycle, the main power core had to be taken offline for 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, the automated defenses would be running on backup power, operating at reduced efficiency. It was a small window, but it was enough. Jack spent his last night on New Haven with Karen. They didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said. Karen knew that trying to stop Jack would be pointless. This was what he did, who he was. She just held him and tried not to think about the possibility that she might lose both her daughter and her husband. The next morning, Jack loaded the reckoning with everything he would need. Weapons, explosives, medical supplies, and enough food and water for 2 weeks. He said goodbye to Karen at the landing pad, promising her that he would bring Sophie home. Then he climbed into his ship, sealed the hatch, and launched into the black. The Vortex Nebula earned its name. Jack had flown through dangerous space before, but this was something else entirely. The nebula was a swirling mass of gas and energy that played havoc with ship sensors. Lightning storms crackled between massive clouds of ionized particles, and asteroids drifted through the chaos like silent predators. Most pilots avoided this region entirely, but Jack had spent years learning to fly in conditions that would ground other ships. The Reckoning's sensors flickered and died every few minutes, forcing Jack to rely on visual navigation and instinct. He flew with the lights off, using the natural glow of the nebula to see by. It was slow going, but slow was better than dead. Jack had studied the patrol routes that Linda's contact had provided, and he timed his approach to coincide with a gap in the Zithran coverage. On the third day of navigating through the nebula, Jack's proximity alarm chirped softly. A Zithran patrol ship was passing less than 2 kilometers away, its sensors sweeping the area. Jack cut his engines entirely and let the Reckoning drift, just another piece of debris in the cosmic storm. The patrol ship continued on its route, unaware that a human vessel was so close. Jack waited until it was out of sensor range before restarting his engines. The processing center appeared on his screens like a tumor growing out of an asteroid. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of New Haven Colony. Docking bays dotted its surface and weapon emplacements bristled from every angle. Jack counted at least 20 patrol ships in the immediate vicinity, not counting whatever might be docked inside. This was a major operation, probably processing captives from a dozen different raids at any given time. Jack found a position behind a cluster of smaller asteroids and settled in to watch. He had time before the maintenance window, and he needed to understand the facility's patterns. He watched ships come and go, tracked the patrol routes, and monitored their communication frequencies. The Zithrans were professional, he had to give them that. Their security was tight, their procedures were solid, but every system had weaknesses if you knew where to look. While Jack observed the facility, Sophie was inside, trying to stay strong for the other children. The Zitharans had separated the captives by age and species, putting humans together in one section. Sophie's cage held 12 children, ranging from 6 years old to 14. They were scared and confused, and many of them were still crying for their parents. Sophie had stopped crying after the first day. Crying didn't help, and her father had taught her that panic was the enemy. Instead, Sophie talked to the other children. She learned their names and where they were from. She told them stories about Earth, even though she had never been there herself. Her father had told her about the homeworld, about blue oceans and green forests and cities that stretched toward the sky. The stories helped, giving the children something to focus on besides their fear. The guards noticed Sophie's influence over the other children. One of them, a tall Zitharan with scars on his face, watched her with interest. His name was Krell, and he was the overseer of this section. Krell had been in the slave trade for 20 years, and he prided himself on being able to break even the most stubborn captives. But there was something about the human girl that bothered him. She wasn't broken. She wasn't even bending. Krell decided to make an example of her. He had the guards pull Sophie out of the cage and bring her to his office. It was a sparse room, all metal and harsh lighting, designed to intimidate. Sophie stood in the center of the room, her hands bound in front of her, and stared at Krell with steady eyes. The overseer circled her slowly, studying her. "You're causing problems," Krell said through his translator. "The other children look to you for strength. This makes my job difficult." Sophie didn't respond. Her father had taught her that silence was sometimes the best weapon. Krell leaned closer. "Do you know what happens to problem children? They get sold to the worst buyers, the ones who want workers for the mines or the processing plants. Hard labor that breaks the body and crushes the spirit." He paused, waiting for fear to show on her face. It didn't come. "Why aren't you afraid, little human?" Sophie met his eyes. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "My father is coming for me, and when he gets here, you're going to wish you'd never been born." Krell laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound. "Your father? Even if he knows where you are, even if he's foolish enough to try, he would have to get through an entire military force. One human against hundreds of my kind. The math is not in his favor." "You don't know my father," Sophie said simply. Something in her certainty made Krell uncomfortable, though he couldn't have said why. He had the guards take her back to the cage, but the conversation stayed with him. Later that day, he pulled up the file on Sophie Morgan. It listed her name, age, and place of origin. There was a note about her parents, Mother Karen Morgan, colony administrator. Father Jack Morgan, occupation listed as freelance contractor. Krell didn't recognize the name, but he ran it through the facility's database anyway. What came back made his blood run cold. Jack Morgan wasn't just a freelance contractor. He was a former human military commander, decorated for actions during the Zytheran human conflicts. More importantly, he was listed in the Galactic Criminal Database as a person of extreme interest, not because he was a criminal, but because he was dangerous, extremely dangerous. The database had reports from 3 different species, all warning that Jack Morgan should not be engaged under any circumstances without overwhelming force. One report, filed by a pirate cartel that no longer existed, included a detailed account of how Jack had systematically dismantled their entire organization over the course of 6 weeks. Another report described him as capable of exceptional violence when motivated, and utterly without mercy toward those who threaten his family. Krell stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he accessed the facility's security protocols and doubled the guard patrols. He sent a message to the patrol ships, warning them to be alert for any unusual activity. And he made a note to move Sophie Morgan's processing forward. The sooner she was sold and off this facility, the better. But Krell's precautions came too late. Jack had already identified his entry point. The maintenance window was scheduled for the next day at 0800 station time. Jack spent the remaining hours preparing his equipment and going over the facility's layout one more time. He had memorized every corridor, every checkpoint, every possible route to the detention area where the captives were held. Jack didn't let himself think about what might have happened to Sophie. Thinking about it would make him angry, and anger made people sloppy. He needed to be cold, precise, surgical. There would be time for anger later after Sophie was safe. As the maintenance window approached, Jack moved the Reckoning into position. He had modified one of the ship's emergency pods, stripping out everything unnecessary and filling it with weapons and explosives. The pod was small enough to slip past the facility's sensors during the power fluctuation, at least in theory. If Jack's calculations were wrong, he would be vaporized by the automated defenses before he got within a kilometer of the facility. The maintenance cycle began exactly on schedule. Jack watched his instruments as the facility's power output dropped. The shields flickered and the weapon platforms went into standby mode. Jack launched the pod immediately, using a burst of thrust that sent it hurtling toward the facility at maximum velocity. He was strapped inside, surrounded by enough explosives to level a small building. The trip took 90 seconds. The pod's basic guidance system kept it on course while Jack counted down in his head. 85 seconds. The shields were still fluctuating. 70 seconds. The weapon platforms were powering up. 50 seconds. The pod was picking up speed, drawn by the facility's gravity. 30 seconds. The automated defenses locked onto the pod. 20 seconds. Warning alarms filled the tiny space. 10 seconds. The pod hit the facility's hull and Jack triggered the shaped charges. The explosion was carefully calculated to breach the outer hull without decompressing the entire section. Metal tore and atmosphere vented into space in a controlled burst. Jack was already moving, climbing out of the ruined pod and into the facility's maintenance corridor. He sealed the breach behind him with quick-setting foam, stopping the atmospheric leak. Jack checked his weapons and his navigation. He was inside. Now came the hard part. He had to fight his way through a heavily guarded facility, find his daughter, and get them both out alive. The odds were not good. But Jack Morgan had never been particularly concerned with odds. The first guard didn't even see Jack coming. One moment the corridor was empty, the next Jack was behind him, and then the guard was unconscious on the floor. Jack dragged him into a storage room and took his access card. The facility's alarm hadn't sounded yet. They knew something had breached the hull, but they didn't know what. Jack intended to keep them confused for as long as possible. He moved through the maintenance level like a ghost, avoiding the security cameras he had memorized from the blueprints. When he encountered guards, he dealt with them quickly and quietly. Jack had learned a long time ago that the key to successful infiltration wasn't avoiding contact entirely. It was making sure that contact didn't raise alarms. Every guard he neutralized bought him a few more minutes before someone noticed the missing personnel. The facility was even larger inside than it had looked from outside. Corridors branched in every direction, leading to processing rooms, storage areas, and living quarters for the guards. Jack navigated by memory and instinct, always moving toward the detention level. He passed by windows that looked out into the nebula, that swirling chaos of light and energy. It seemed impossible that anything could exist in such a hostile environment, but the Zytherans had made it work. Jack reached the first security checkpoint 12 minutes after entering the facility. 2 guards stood at a reinforced door, checking identification cards for anyone who wanted to pass. Jack watched them from around a corner, calculating angles and timing. He had 3 options: try to bluff his way through with the stolen access card, find another route, or fight. The first option was risky. The second would cost time he didn't have. That left the third option. Jack stepped around the corner with his weapon raised. The guards had just enough time to register his presence before he fired. The weapon made very little noise, just a soft hiss as it put both guards to sleep with tranquilizer rounds. Jack preferred not to kill when he didn't have to. Not because he was squeamish, but because bodies raised more alarms than unconscious guards. He dragged them into a side room and used the stolen access card to open the security door. The alarm finally went off when Jack was 3 levels down. Someone had found the unconscious guards or noticed the hull breach. Red lights began flashing throughout the facility, and a voice began speaking in the Zytheran language. Jack didn't need a translator to know what it was saying. Intruder alert. All personnel to battle stations. Seal the facility. Heavy doors began slamming shut throughout the complex, dividing it into secure sections. Jack ran, racing the closing doors. He slid under one just as it was sealing, the metal missing his head by inches. The facility's defense systems were activating, automated turrets dropping from the ceiling in key corridors. Jack had studied the turret placements and knew how to avoid their firing zones, moving in patterns that exploited their blind spots. He encountered his first real resistance on the detention level. A squad of 6 guards was moving to secure the prisoners, and they spotted Jack before he could take cover. The corridor erupted in weapons fire, energy bolts scorching the walls and floor. Jack returned fire while moving, never staying in one place long enough for the guards to get a clean shot. He used the environment to his advantage, ducking behind support columns and using doorways for cover. The fight lasted 30 seconds. When it was over, 3 guards were unconscious, 2 were wounded, and 1 had retreated to raise the alarm. Jack didn't chase him. He was close now. The detention cells were just ahead. He could feel it in his bones, that sense of proximity that came from years of hunting and being hunted. Sophie heard the alarm and knew something had changed. The guards were shouting, running through the corridors with their weapons drawn. Some of them looked frightened, which was strange. She had never seen the Zytherans look frightened before. The other children were panicking, crying, and calling out questions that no one could answer. Sophie pressed her face against the bars of the cage, trying to see what was happening. Then she heard it, the sound of weapons fire closer than it had been before, and underneath that, the sound of someone moving through the facility with purpose and precision. Sophie's heart began to beat faster. She grabbed the bars of the cage and called out to the other children, "Be quiet. Everyone be quiet." The children fell silent, looking at her with wide, frightened eyes. Sophie listened hard, tracking the sound of combat as it moved through the facility. It was getting closer. 1 person moving against an entire facility of guards. It was impossible, but it was happening, and Sophie knew with absolute certainty who it was. "He's here," she whispered. "My dad is here." Jack fought his way into the detention area, leaving a trail of unconscious and wounded guards behind him. He had long since abandoned stealth in favor of speed and overwhelming force. The Zytherans were professional soldiers, but they weren't ready for someone like Jack. They had been trained to fight other military forces, not a single human who moved like violence incarnate. The detention area was a large open space filled with cages. Jack scanned them quickly, his eyes moving across dozens of captives from 6 different species. And there, in a cage near the back, he saw her. Sophie was pressed against the bars, her face lit up with recognition and relief. Jack felt something break inside his chest, but he didn't let it show on his face. Not yet. They weren't safe yet. He ran to her cage, his fingers already working on the lock. The mechanism was simple, designed to be opened quickly in case of emergency. Jack had it open in 5 seconds. Sophie threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding on like she would never let go. Jack held her with one arm while keeping his weapon trained on the corridor with the other. "I knew you'd come," Sophie said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I told them you would come." I'm here now, Jack said quietly. Are you hurt? Sophie shook her head. Jack quickly checked her over anyway, his experienced eyes looking for signs of injury or abuse. She seemed physically unharmed, though she was thinner than she should be and there were dark circles under her eyes. Jack felt rage building in his chest, but he forced it down. Focus. Get Sophie out first. There would be time for revenge later. The other children were calling out now, begging Jack to free them too. Jack looked at Sophie. I need you to be brave for a little longer. Can you do that? Sophie nodded. Jack set her down and began opening the other cages. He freed all 12 children in Sophie's section, then moved to the other cages. Within 2 minutes, he had released over 50 captives. They crowded around him, speaking in different languages and asking questions he didn't have time to answer. Jack raised his voice. Listen to me. We're getting out of here, but you need to do exactly what I say. Stay together, stay quiet, and move when I tell you to move. Understand? The captives nodded. Some of them were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they understood that this human was trying to help them. Jack began leading them back the way he had come, retracing his route through the facility. It was slower with the children, but Jack adjusted his tactics. He moved them in groups using cover and timing to avoid the guard patrols. They had made it 3 levels up when Krell appeared with a full security team. The overseer had finally realized who was tearing through his facility, and he had marshaled his forces for a final confrontation. 20 heavily armed guards blocked the corridor with Krell standing in the center. He looked at Jack with something that might have been respect or might have been fear. Jack Morgan, Krell said through his translator. I should have known. The database did not exaggerate your capabilities. Jack positioned himself between Krell's forces and the children. He had maybe 6 seconds before the shooting started. He needed to use those seconds well. You have one chance, Jack said, his voice carrying clearly across the space. Let us pass and I leave your facility standing. Try to stop me and I bring this entire asteroid down on your heads. Krell laughed, but it sounded forced. You're bluffing. One man cannot destroy a facility this size. Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a small device. It was a dead man's switch, connected to the explosives he had placed throughout the facility during his infiltration. Krell's expression changed as he recognized what it was. I placed charges on your main power core, your life support systems, and your structural supports, Jack said calmly. If my heart stops beating, if I release this switch, or if I activate it manually, this facility tears itself apart. Your choice, Krell. Let us go or die here with us. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Krell looked at his guards, then back at Jack. He was calculating odds, trying to decide if Jack was bluffing. Finally, he made his decision. He ordered his guards to lower their weapons and step aside. Jack herded the children past the security team, never taking his eyes off Krell. When Sophie passed the overseer, she stopped and looked up at him. I told you, she said simply. I told you my father would come. Then she followed Jack, and Krell was left standing in the corridor watching them go. Getting out of the facility was harder than getting in. Jack had surprise on his side during the infiltration, but now the entire facility knew he was there and what he was doing. Every guard was mobilized, and the automated defenses were fully active. Worse, Jack now had 50 children to protect, most of them too young to understand tactical movement or defensive positions. Jack led them through the maintenance corridors, avoiding the main passages where guards would be concentrated. The children followed him in a ragged line, holding hands to keep from getting separated. Sophie stayed close to Jack's side, helping to keep the younger children calm. She had become a natural leader during her captivity, and that strength showed now when it was needed most. They were 2 levels from the docking bay when they encountered their first real obstacle. A security team had sealed off the corridor ahead, setting up a defensive position with barricades and heavy weapons. Jack could see at least 10 guards, maybe more, hidden behind cover. There was no way around them, and trying to fight through would get children killed. Jack pulled the group back around a corner and assessed the situation. The dead man's switch was still in his pocket, but he didn't want to use it if he had another choice. Blowing the facility would kill everyone inside, including the children. He needed another option. That's when he heard a voice speaking over the facility's communication system. It wasn't Krell. It was speaking in accented but clear English. Mr. Morgan, this is Commander Vrix of the Zytheran military. I need to speak with you. Alone. Jack was immediately suspicious. It could be a trap, but something about the voice made him hesitate. He told Sophie to keep the children back and carefully moved forward until he could see a communication panel on the wall. He activated it. "I'm listening," Jack said. The voice came through more clearly now. "I am not your enemy, Mr. Morgan. I serve in the legitimate Zitharan military, not these slavers who disgrace my people. I have been watching your progress through the facility, and I am impressed. But you cannot escape with those children unless someone helps you." "Why would you help me?" Jack asked, his finger still on the trigger of his weapon. "Because this facility is a stain on Zitharan honor," Brick said. "For years my government has looked the other way while criminals use our technology and our space to conduct their evil trade. I have tried to work within the system to stop them, but the corruption runs too deep. You have given me an opportunity to expose this operation and bring it down." Jack considered this. It could still be a trap, but his tactical options were limited. "What are you offering?" "Safe passage to your ship," Brick said. "I will transmit an override code that will open the sealed doors and disable the automated defenses in your path. In exchange, I need you to do two things. First, document everything you see in this facility. Record the prisoners, the equipment, the evidence of their crimes. Second, transmit that evidence to the Galactic Council. With proof this concrete, they will have no choice but to act." Jack thought about it for 3 seconds. "Send the code." A moment later, Jack's communication device buzzed with an incoming data packet. The codes were complex, military grade. If they were fake, Jack would know as soon as he tried to use them. He moved back to the sealed door that blocked their path and entered the override code. The door hissed open and the guards on the other side looked shocked. "Move," Jack shouted to the children. They ran through the opening before the guards could react. Jack covered their retreat, firing suppression rounds to keep the security team pinned down. Once all the children were through, Jack followed and sealed the door behind them using another code from Vrix. As they moved through the facility, Jack noticed that the automated defenses weren't firing at them. The turrets tracked their movement but didn't activate. Vrix was keeping his word, at least for now. Jack used his communication device to record everything they passed. The processing rooms where captives were sorted, the holding areas where they were kept, the equipment used to transport them. They reached the docking bay 15 minutes later. The Reckoning was still where Jack had left it, drifting in space just outside the facility's shields. But there was a problem. The docking bay was designed for Zitharan ships and the controls were locked down. Jack couldn't open the bay doors from inside. "Vrix," Jack said into his communicator. "I need those bay doors open." "I'm working on it," the Zitharan commander replied. "But Krell has locked me out of that system. Give me 2 minutes, and 2 minutes might as well have been 2 hours. Jack could hear guards converging on their position, drawn by the notification that someone had accessed the docking bay. He positioned the children behind cover and prepared to defend them. Sophie stood next to him, refusing to hide with the others. "Dad, I can help," she said. "I know how to shoot. You taught me." Jack looked at his daughter, at her determined expression and steady hands. She was right. He had taught her to shoot, starting when she was 8 years old. Target practice on the range back on New Haven, learning basic safety and marksmanship. He had hoped she would never need those skills, but hope didn't count for much right now. Jack handed her a small pistol from his pack. "Stay behind cover. Only shoot if they get past me. Understand?" Sophie nodded and took up a position behind a cargo container. Jack checked his ammunition and prepared for what was coming. The first guards appeared at the bay entrance 30 seconds later. Jack opened fire, and the docking bay became a war zone. The guards had numbers and firepower, but Jack had position and experience. He moved constantly, never staying in one spot long enough to be pinned down. His shots were precise, each one calculated to disable rather than kill when possible. He wasn't a murderer. He was a father protecting his child. The firefight lasted 2 minutes, though it felt much longer. Several guards went down and the others pulled back to regroup. Jack used the lull to check his ammunition. He was running low. If they came again with greater numbers, he might not be able to hold them off. "Vrix," Jack said urgently. "I need those doors now." "I have them," the Zitharan commander replied. "Opening now." The massive bay doors began to grind open, revealing the swirling chaos of the Vortex Nebula beyond. Jack felt the atmosphere starting to vent and knew they had maybe 60 seconds before the bay depressurized completely. He activated his communicator and sent a signal to the Reckoning. The ship's computer received the command and began moving toward the facility. Jack gathered the children quickly. Everyone hold on to each other. Don't let go no matter what happens. The children formed a chain linking arms and hands. Jack was at the front with Sophie right behind him. As the atmospheric pressure dropped, Jack activated his suit's emergency field, extending it to cover as many children as he could. It wasn't designed for this many people, but it would have to work. The Reckoning slid into the docking bay with its cargo ramp already lowering. Jack pushed the children toward it, fighting against the rushing air that wanted to pull them into space. The younger children were screaming, terrified by the decompression. Sophie helped him move them, her face pale but determined. They got everyone onto the ramp just as Krell and his remaining guards arrived at the bay entrance. The overseer saw what was happening and screamed orders at his men. They raised their weapons, preparing to fire at the escaping ship. Jack turned and aimed his weapon at the support beams holding up that section of the docking bay. He fired 3 precise shots and the beams collapsed. Part of the ceiling came down, blocking the guards and cutting off their line of fire. Jack ran up the ramp as the Reckoning began pulling away from the facility. He hit the button to close the cargo bay, and the ramp sealed just as they cleared the facility's shields. The ship's computer took over, navigating away from the processing center and into the nebula. Jack helped the children to the passenger compartments, making sure everyone was accounted for. 52 children all alive and safe. He had done it. He had actually done it. Sophie found him in the cockpit 10 minutes later. Jack was sitting in the pilot's seat, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. She climbed into his lap like she used to when she was younger, and Jack held her close. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Sophie said, "Can we go home now?" Jack kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, kiddo. We can go home." Behind them, the Vortex Nebula swallowed the processing center from view. Jack had sent all the evidence to Commander Vrix before leaving, fulfilling his end of the bargain. What happened next was up to the Galactic Council, but for now, Jack just focused on flying his daughter and the other children to safety. The rest could wait. The journey back through the Vortex Nebula took 3 days. Jack flew carefully, avoiding patrol ships and electromagnetic storms while the children recovered from their ordeal. The Reckoning wasn't designed to carry 52 passengers, so conditions were cramped. The children slept in the cargo bay on makeshift bedding, ate from the ship's emergency rations, and tried to process everything that had happened to them. Sophie became Jack's unofficial assistant, helping him care for the younger children. She handed out food, told stories to calm the frightened ones, and helped the injured kids with basic first aid. Jack watched her work and felt both pride and sadness. She had grown up too fast in the past week, forced to become stronger than any 10-year-old should have to be. On the second day, Jack received a transmission from Commander Vrix. The Zitharan military officer's voice came through clearly despite the nebula's interference. "Mr. Morgan, I wanted to inform you that your evidence has been delivered to the Galactic Council. They have already dispatched investigators to the processing center. Krell and his entire operation are being shut down as we speak." Jack felt a moment of satisfaction, but it was tempered by the knowledge that there were probably dozens of other facilities like Krell's scattered across the galaxy. "What about the other kids? The ones who were already sold?" Vrix was quiet for a moment. "We're working on that. The evidence you provided included buyer lists and transaction records. The Council is using that information to track down the other captives. It will take time, but we will find them." "See that you do," Jack said, then ended the transmission. They emerged from the Vortex Nebula on the morning of the 4th day. Open space had never looked so beautiful to Jack. He immediately sent out messages to New Haven and to the families of the other children. Many of them had come from different colonies, and Jack provided the Council with coordinates for returning them home. But first he was going to New Haven. He had a promise to keep. Karen Morgan was waiting at the landing pad when the Reckoning touched down. She had barely slept since Jack left, spending her days helping coordinate the rescue efforts and her nights praying that he would come back alive. When the ship's cargo ramp lowered and Sophie appeared, Karen broke down completely. She ran to her daughter and swept her into her arms, crying and laughing at the same time. Jack stood at the top of the ramp, watching his family reunite. He felt something in his chest loosen, a tension he had been carrying since the moment he received Karen's message. It was finally over. Sophie was safe and they were together again. That was all that mattered. The colony held an emergency assembly that evening. All the returned children were there, along with their families and the entire colonial population. Linda Hayes stood at the front and explained what had happened. She told them about Jack's rescue mission, about the Zitharin facility, and about the Galactic Council's response. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Jack tried to slip away before anyone could make him the center of attention, but Sophie grabbed his hand and wouldn't let go. So he stood there, uncomfortable and silent, while the colonists thanked him and called him a hero. Jack didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a father who had done what any father would do. The fact that most fathers couldn't infiltrate an alien military facility and fight their way out with 50 children was beside the point. Over the next few days, Galactic Council ships arrived to transport the other children home. Jack watched each departure, making sure every child was safely aboard and headed to their family. Some of the children cried when they left, not because they were sad to go home, but because they were saying goodbye to Sophie and the other kids they had bonded with during captivity. A week after the rescue, Coordinator Venn arrived at New Haven with a formal delegation from the Galactic Council. The Thurian bureaucrat looked different than he had during their first meeting. Less smug, more respectful, he requested a private meeting with Jack, Karen, and Sophie. In Linda Hayes' office, Venn explained what had happened since Jack's raid on the processing center. The evidence Jack had gathered had exposed a network of corruption that reached into multiple governments, including the Zitharin leadership. Dozens of officials had been arrested, and the entire slave trade operation was being dismantled. Commander Vrix was being hailed as a hero for his role in exposing the conspiracy. "The Council wishes to thank you, Mr. Morgan," Venn said formally. "Your actions have led to the rescue of over 300 captives from various species. You have done the galaxy a great service." Jack didn't respond. He just looked at the Thurian coordinator with flat, cold eyes. Venn shifted uncomfortably. "We also wish to discuss the matter of your unauthorized military action in Zitharin space. Technically, your raid constitutes an act of aggression that could have triggered an interstellar incident." "Technically," Jack said, his voice very quiet. "You told me that rescuing my daughter would take months because of bureaucratic procedures, so I didn't have much choice." Venn held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your position, Mr. Morgan, and I want you to know that the Council has decided not to pursue any charges against you. In fact, we would like to offer you a position as a special operative. Your skills could be very useful in future rescue operations." "No," Jack said immediately. "I'm done with that life. I have a family to take care of." Karen reached over and squeezed his hand. She knew what it had cost Jack to go back to his old ways even for a few days. She could see it in his eyes, the darkness that came from doing violent things for good reasons. He needed time to come back from that, to remember who he was when he wasn't fighting. Venn nodded slowly. "I understand. But if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." He paused, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry we failed you and your family. You were right to do what you did. Sometimes the rules need to be broken to do what's right." After Venn left, the Morgan family sat together in silence for a while. Finally, Sophie spoke up. "Are we going to stay on New Haven?" Jack and Karen looked at each other. They had talked about this over the past few days. New Haven held painful memories now, and the colony would never feel completely safe again. But running away wasn't the answer either. "We're going to stay," Karen said. "This is our home. We built a life here, and we're not going to let what happened drive us away." Sophie seemed relieved. She had made friends on New Haven, and she didn't want to leave them behind. "Will the aliens ever come back?" Jack pulled his daughter close. "I don't know, kiddo. But if they do, they'll remember what happened last time someone tried to take you from me, and maybe that memory will be enough to keep them away." Over the following weeks, life on New Haven slowly returned to normal. The colonists rebuilt what had been damaged during the raid and improved their security systems. The Galactic Council stationed a small military presence in the sector, a deterrent against future attacks. And the story of Jack Morgan's rescue mission spread across the galaxy, becoming the kind of legend that parents told their children. Different species heard the story and interpreted it in different ways. Some saw it as proof of human determination and courage. Others saw it as a warning about what humans were capable of when pushed too far. But everyone agreed on one thing. You didn't threaten a human's family unless you were prepared for the consequences. Jack tried to go back to his normal life, taking contracts and doing the kind of work that paid the bills without requiring him to shoot anyone. But he found that he couldn't forget the children he had left behind. The ones who hadn't been at the processing center, who were still out there somewhere in the galaxy's slave markets. He thought about them at night when he couldn't sleep, wondered if anyone was coming for them the way he had come for Sophie. 3 months after the rescue, Jack received another message from Commander Vrix. The Zitharan officer had been promoted and given command of a new task force dedicated to fighting the slave trade. He wanted Jack's help in planning future operations just as an advisor. Jack wouldn't have to go into the field, just provide tactical analysis and training. Jack discussed it with Karen. She could see how much the question weighed on him, the tension between his desire to help and his need to stay with his family. Finally, she told him something that he needed to hear. "You're not the same person you were 3 months ago," Karen said. "You went back to being a soldier to save Sophie, and you did what needed to be done. But you don't have to keep being that person. You can choose something different now." "But what about all those other kids?" Jack asked. "What about their families?" "Let someone else save them," Karen said gently. "You've done your part. Now it's time to be Sophie's father again, fully, completely, without one foot still in that other world." Jack thought about it for a long time. Then he sent a message to Commander Vrix, declining the offer but providing the Zitharan with all the tactical information he had gathered. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe it would help someone else succeed where bureaucracy had failed. The story ends on a quiet evening 6 months after Sophie's rescue. The Morgan family is having dinner together in their home on New Haven. Through the window, they can see the colony's lights spreading across the valley, small points of warmth in the